welcome. I'm so glad that you can join me for this episode of Your Spectacular Life. And today we're going to be talking about how to communicate even in conflict. And I know it is so difficult when we're upset or triggered with another person to actually tell them what's on our mind while being neutral and being clear. So I've got a great technique for you today to use and to practice, both with family members, partners, work buddies, friends, etc. Because we all know that we tend to get in conflict if we have a meaningful relationship with them. What they say matters. And it's interesting, when we are in conflict, we tend to experience the 3 F's. We can either want to flee, we can want to fight, or we can freeze like a deer in the headlights. We're just stuck or wanting to run away. So this technique is called Nonviolent Communication. And it was created by a gentleman by the name of Marshall Rosenberg in the 60s. And if you remember back what was happening in the 60s, that there were a lot of change going on. There was difficulty in communicating with people of different color, with women, and a number of other things coming up because the country was at an incredible period of unrest and positive change. So Rosenberg created this method so people could sit down and actually have meaningful communication. Now, nonviolent communication, or NVC as it's called, is used to create a positive connection and recognizing that mutual enrichment outcomes will emerge from the qualities of those relationships. Now, rather than be motivated by fear or guilt or coercion, people give freely and happily when they feel good about each other and trust that their needs really matter to the other person. And NVC can create this kind of environment and these kind of relationships, both personally and professionally. NVC recognizes that how we interact with each other is driven by core human motivators, essentially our human needs. And we have these deeply ingrained ways of communicating that can be violent or hurtful or challenging, that get in the way of these satisfying relationships. Let's face it, when I get triggered, I tend to want to hurt back. So this type of communication format really keeps me balanced and neutral so I can communicate my basic needs to the other person. Now, some of the basics involve expressing ourselves, again, with clarity, compassion, self-responsibility, empathy, and thinking of the common good for the other person, which is kind of the exact opposite of violent communication. In violent communication, we can be threatening, judging, criticizing, dehumanizing, blaming, or coercing the other person so we can get our way in a situation. And violent communication creates misunderstanding, frustration, and disagreements because, frankly, when somebody is trying to do that to us, we shut down. We stop listening. So the communication is broken. But NVC essentially is a way that we can restore that in everyday terms. It's a way of essentially reformatting things that were getting in the way of those communications and connection for what we were looking for. We move away from communication that is shameful or guilt-driven, or even extreme cases, physical violence. Now, many of us are taught to express our feelings in terms of what the other person has done to us. What NVC teaches is to take ownership of our feelings and ownership of our needs, to ask in a healthy way what will benefit us and what is fair to all the parties involved. And the first phase, I'm going to start talking about the steps, but the first phase is expressing. If I am the person who wants to express something, I do it in terms of I am, without criticism or blaming. So the first step is observation. That's the fact of what we're hearing, seeing, or touching. And essentially we communicate what we heard or the meaning from what we heard. And this would go something like what I see, or what I remember, or what I experience that contributed or that did not contribute to my well-being. I'm going to use a basic household example. So phase one, or step one, would go something like this. When I see dishes left in the sink. How many times has that happened? The next step is the feeling associated with that. These are the emotions, the sensations, free of thought or story. We're not piling on things. We're not using our mind-based stories to load on. It's simple, it's direct. We're communicating some simple emotions attributed to what I saw when the dishes were in the sink. For example, it can go something like this. It makes me feel frustrated and angry. When I see dishes in the sink, it makes me feel frustrated and angry. Now, step number 3, now there are 4 steps out to this format, are needs. These are needs that we all need in getting our needs met. And this is what I need or value that will make this end goal work out better. What I need so I can feel valued, what I need so I can feel balanced and my well-being is uplifted. And that would be something like this. I want to feel like we're a team when it comes to taking care of household chores. So when I see dishes in the sink, step 1, it makes me feel frustrated and angry. That's step 2. Step 3 is what I want is to feel like a team, like we're both taking care of the house. Now you can see there's no guilt, there's no shame, there's no storyline. It's simple facts that I'm communicating. And this person is going to be listening at that point. The last step, or step 4 of this format, is a request. And the request is for specific action free of demand. All right? Requests are free of demand. The person that's listening, and I'm not expecting them to go forward with the response or the request. I am just making that request so that other person can hear me and consider it and perhaps even make a compromise. So that would be something very concrete and actionable. And that would sound something like this. My request is that you please wash your dishes and don't leave them in the sink for me to do or for me to wash. So did you get that? It's a simple request. And even though I'm talking about this, it could take 20 seconds to communicate this whole format. First, when I see dishes in the sink, it makes me feel frustrated and angry. My needs or my goal is that we're a team in taking care of the house, and that my request is that these dishes get washed and not left around for me. Simple and straightforward. Now the next phase is the other person. Remember, we had phase 1 of where I am communicating. Next we have phase 2 of the other person empathetically receiving the communication without hearing communication and blame. So they can take that in, and then they can come back and say, let me see if I have this down, or if I'm hearing you correctly, or if I've got it right. And they communicate what they heard. In fact, they can communicate using the exact same words that you use. But if I was listening, I want to make sure I didn't attach or perceive anything that wasn't there in those statements. So that's it. That's the format. That's the communication method. Straight, simple, easy. Some of the goals of NVC are self-compassion, expressing with heart, receiving with compassion, prioritizing what the communication is all about. It's about connecting with this person, not punishing. And it's moving beyond who's right and who's wrong to get your needs met. No one is right, no one is wrong. I'm simply communicating, and the other person is simply hearing and then repeating it back. Essentially what it does is it allows me to take responsibility for my feelings. It allows me to take responsibility, if I was listening, for actions. I can live in peace with unmet needs. I can get it off my chest. I don't have to live with holding on to it. I have a good chance of getting my needs met if that request is reasonable. And I can increase the capacity to meet with this other person in the present while not going back to the past or worrying about the future. It's great to use in a relationship because it helps us to learn to listen to ourselves and to be better listeners with others. We can also learn to identify and express previously unmet goals that we've carried around that may be fueling things like anger or resentment. And we can actively help create and nurture relationships for ourselves. And what I really like about it and how I use it in a different way is I use it for personal development and growth. That is interpersonal development. When I am upset or something comes up, I check in and I go through the steps just quietly before I've even communicated with another person to make sure that what is going on and what I'm feeling makes sense by putting it in the format so I can communicate that in a neutral way. And I can transform this internal dialogue to something that this other person can hear, and I can be clear and they can hear it without judgment or criticism. So I really hope you've enjoyed learning this technique and format, nonviolent communication. And it's, again, a simple way to communicate even though you are in conflict. And if you found this useful, please like my page. You can write a comment. You can get more information about NVC. You can subscribe to my channel. And you can continue to do the inner work that is just so important when connecting to others. Thank you so much for listening. Please visit my website for more information, jodywhitescoaching.com and yourspectacularlife.com. Have a spectacular relationship.